This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Over the last few years, successive Conservative Prime Ministers have made getting immigration under control a priority for their government. Multiple different laws have been introduced with the express purpose of making the UK a less attractive place to those seeking asylum, and both David Cameron and Theresa May stated that they wanted to reduce net migration to the tens of thousands. By and large, though, they haven't been all that successful, and each year the papers latch onto images of asylum seekers' attempts to cross the channel as a representation of the government's failure. Despite immigration and asylum nominally being one of the policy areas that the Tories feel most confident in, and one that the public usually trusts them on, their trust in this area has been declining significantly in the last few years. And polling suggests that Labour are now more trusted on the issue for the first time in years. And this is significant too, because the wider public see immigration as one of the most important issues facing the country right now. So in this video, we're going to look into immigration, why it's been increasing recently, and why the government is struggling to reduce it. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Let's start by looking at the headline migration rate. Since 2015, the net migration rate fell from just below 400,000 to just above 200,000 by March 2020. In the next year, though, the net migration rate fell hugely. However, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why. After the pandemic, the migration rate skyrocketed again, with the ONS reporting that the figure reached 606,000 in 2022. However, only last week the ONS had to revise this figure upwards, admitting that it was actually 745,000, 139,000 more than it originally thought. This year, the ONS has predicted that the migration figure had fallen again slightly, back down to 672,000. This, though, is still massively above the average migration figure of the mid-2010s. Now, it's worth looking into why migration was so high last year, and remains so high this year. When we look at emigration, we see that it's remained relatively stable. Since 2015, it's slowly increased from around 400,000 to about 600,000 in 2020, before then falling back down to around 500,000 in 2023. As such, it'd be disingenuous to suggest that this increase has contributed all that much to the increased migration rate. Instead, we need to look to immigration. Ever since 2016, the immigration rate to the UK from the EU has been dropping. Perhaps this is because of the economic recovery in southern European countries after the Eurozone crisis, or perhaps it was because of the perceived instability in the UK following the Brexit vote and subsequent legislative gridlock about actually leaving. Additionally, the free movement of people in the EU to the UK ended in January 2021. Since 2016, the EU immigration rate has dropped from around 500,000 people a year to not even 200,000 a year. Conversely, though, non-EU immigration has exploded from just over 200,000 people in 2016 to 1 million in 2022, and just under 1 million in 2023. It's this, then, that has caused the immigration number to skyrocket. In discussing the reason for this increase in non-EU immigration, the ONS pointed out that there were 3 reasons this increased significantly from 2022. More people arriving for work, more people arriving for study, and more people arriving through humanitarian routes. Now, the reason behind the big uptick in worker visas recently has been to do with the new visa introduced in 2020 called the Health and Care Worker Visa. This allowed those that work in these professions to come to the UK to do a job in this field. As the graph shows, since it was introduced in 2020, the skilled worker visa accounts for a huge number of the increase in the number of workers coming to the UK. And when we look more specifically at the number of these visas handed out from 2022 to 2023, we see that the number of these visas are increasing. When we look at why the study visas have increased, we see that this is mainly to do with an increase in the number of dependents of those studying coming to the UK, with those coming from Nigeria and India accounting mainly for the rise in 2022, and with these numbers rising even further in 2023. For humanitarian routes, the picture is a lot clearer. The UK introduced schemes to provide visas to those in Hong Kong and Ukraine in 2022. It was Boris Johnson that introduced both of these schemes, the former as a response to the new security law introduced by China, and the latter as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As a result, in 2022, people arriving in the UK from these schemes accounted for 19% of all non-EU long-term immigration, up from 9% only a year earlier. So those reasons are why there was an increase in immigration for work, study and humanitarian reasons. Let's lastly briefly look at why then the government has failed to address increasing immigration. Sunak's government talks a lot about asylum and small boat crossings, making cracking down on these one of his 5 priorities for government. However, small boat arrivals make up less than 1% of just non-EU migration. Sunak's government, and indeed Johnson's before him, passed various bits of legislation to try and crack down on this, and in March, Sunak and Macron agreed a new border cooperation deal, which essentially involves the UK giving France hundreds of millions of pounds a year to improve its channel border security. To Sunak's credit, crossings are down compared to last year, but they're still ahead of 2019, 2020 and 2021. Tackling this specific issue, though, remains one of the Prime Minister's priorities. Perhaps the reason for this is that attacking the main 3 reasons for an increase in immigration is politically unpalatable. Trying to reduce the number of people coming to the UK to be doctors and nurses just wouldn't go down well, especially with the NHS waiting list being as long as it is. Watering down the offering for foreign students would act as a disincentive to study in the UK, which would provoke a backlash from universities and would almost certainly have negative economic side effects. And closing the Ukraine and Hong Kong visa schemes would undermine the UK's commitment to both countries and cause fairly major diplomatic problems. Ultimately, there just isn't an easy way to reduce immigration. The parts of the immigration system that those on the right often attack, such as asylum, just don't contribute all that much to the immigration figures, and cutting the parts that do would probably provoke a significant backlash from the electorate. It's unlikely then that the Tories will succeed in the near future in their aim to bring the net migration rate down to the tens of thousands. A lot of the stuff that we talk about at TLDR can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive into economics and detailed data. But there's a fun and easy way to learn more, which also doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years and years of schooling. That's because Brilliant is the best way to learn maths, data science and computer science interactively. It doesn't even take long to learn either. These complex topics are broken down into accessible chunks, designed around your busy schedule. That means that by spending just a few minutes a day, you can accumulate new knowledge over time in an actually fun way. As time goes on, you'll get used to that empowering feeling of learning too, because this isn't just about memorization and lectures. Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to teach you the principles behind otherwise complex subjects, and ensuring you actually understand what's going on. So whether you want to brush up on your basic math skills, improve your employment prospects by learning about future technologies, or just have fun with coding, you can check out everything that Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days. Click on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.